I came around the corner, I was at the top of the stairs, and what I saw from at the top of the stairs was a man right here around the corner with his arm like this and a gun pointing up at me. All I could see was a black hat and a black jacket, and that's all I could see, and the gun. And I stood there thinking that this was the serial killer, and he's yelling at me, "Come down now, ma'am, come down right now."
They came with the director of milk control, the assistant director, and our inspector, and they all came and pretended they were just going to do an inspection, and then they did a seizure.
They showed up at 5:30 in the morning in the middle of a blizzard, and they had 42 armed federal agents and USDA officials, and they cleared out our entire barn. They took the sheep that we brought from Belgium and the Netherlands. They even took the sheep that I had brought over from New Zealand, and they took them out to Iowa and they killed them for a disease that doesn't exist to this day.
There are two competing food systems in America. First, you have the industrial system, factory, farms, and agribusiness. Then, there's the local system, consisting of small, sustainable farms and artisanal producers. Sadly, most food production laws are designed to support the industrial operations. And the current U.S. agricultural policies could potentially destroy our local food system. I'm Kristen Canty, mom of 4. The reason I set out to make this film is because when one of my sons was 4 years old, he was a very sick child with allergies and asthma. Conventional medicine wasn't helping him, so I did some research and found out raw milk could be a remedy. I gave my son raw milk, and his allergies completely disappeared. I had to go directly to a small farm to get our raw milk. And I started buying grass-fed meats, eggs, vegetables, and fruits from a number of small local farms. As I got to know these farmers, they told me they were encountering a variety of legal problems from both the state and federal authorities. I quickly realized that my ability to buy the healthy foods I want could be in jeopardy. The industrial food system is growing and becoming more powerful. But the small, independent food system is in danger of vanishing.
Every time there is a major shakeup in the food system, local food takes a hit. And so now we have bills wending their way through Congress, for example, that would give the Food and Drug Administration the right to conduct warrantless searches on farms to find out if anything is being done that is not science-based. Well, science-based, you know what science-based is? Science-based is petroleum-based fertilizer, herbicides, pesticides, antibiotics, irradiation, cloning. That's all science-based.
You know, food safety has been hitting the headlines a huge amount. And I think most people who look at it agree that there are huge food safety problems with our mainstream system. You know, it's wrong when people die from eating peanut butter. That shouldn't happen. And it happens because there are huge flaws in the mainstream food safety system. The problem is right now that Congress has sort of taken this attitude of we've got to do something about food safety, and they're out to regulate everything and everyone to the tiniest detail. And so instead of focusing on the real problems, instead of directing FDA to really enforce, to really regulate and inspect these huge facilities, which is where all of the major foodborne illnesses have been traced back to, they're saying everyone who processes food must be registered with the government. They have to pay fees. And when you regulate like that, you're going to drive these people out of business, and then consumers won't have any other options. The only option consumers will be left with is the grocery store chains buying from these huge processing plants, which is where these problems keep getting traced back to.
Our regulations are barking up the wrong tree. We absolutely have problems in this country around food safety and food security, but for regulators to prohibit small-scale, diversified production and processing of food when there's absolute evidence that that is the safest, most secure way for us to feed ourselves as a society, and to let huge corporations that are poisoning us scot-free is completely ridiculous. Now, I think somebody should have the choice, if they want to eat something that's bad for them. That's their choice, but I want to have the choice to eat something that I believe is good for me, and that belief comes from thousands and thousands of years of human experience.
I sell a lot of leafy greens to gardeners, and plants like chards, I no longer trust them because they're coming out of the Wilmette Valley over on the West Coast, and they're surrounded by GMO chards and beets. I think that government needs to step up to the plate and require that everything that has a GMO product in it, any kind of food, is labeled. And every single seed that goes out there has to be labeled that it's GMO-free. Government's not going to do it. It's not in their interests.
Well, I think that there's a real struggle for the government to try and make a one-size-fits-all kind of approach to food safety, and that's just not going to work because, you know, we have like maybe 2% of the farms that are smaller. It used to be only small farms. So there's got to be a way that we can protect biodiversity. We can show that sustainable farming is the only way forward. And so we need to be transitioning and thinking about protecting those farms and even growing those farms and bringing more farmers into the picture.
The regulations for the little farm say it's one farmer. It takes as long to do all the paperwork as it does to do the farming. That's okay for a huge company that employs one person to do that all the time and then has a lot of other people working. But for one little farmer, he doesn't have time to farm because he's got to do all the paperwork. The federal government took hold of it and went, we've got to make sure it's even more burdensome for the small guy and nothing for the big guy, because that's what the federal government does. It takes care of the top of the pyramid.
There is I believe, a misperception by many that local equals safe and large equals unsafe. I think that's wrong. I think we have got large people who are very safe and small local farmers who are very safe, and vice versa. So it's a mixture. And you can't simply write legislation that is going to apply to a multi-billion-dollar multinational company and expect it to fit to somebody who's a local farmer in Maryland or Massachusetts. It isn't going to work.
I have to do so much paperwork in order to be certified organic. That's sort of okay, but it's 3 inches of stuff I have to submit in order to sell this stuff as certified organic. I don't resent being inspected. I resent the amount of work that I have to do. It's not productive. I would like to see chemical farmers have to go through this baloney and tell their customers what kind of chemicals they're using on their food that people are consuming. That's never going to happen.
If you look at the statistics, there are many fewer small farms today than there were 40 or 50 years ago. So the government really has encouraged kind of factory farming, big ag.
I think that the freedom to be able to eat what you want is absolutely critical, and you know, part of it is the freedom to be able to get what you want, you know, naturally grown foods that are, you know, that are organic, that are clean, and also knowing what you're getting. It is alarming these days to hear more and more about what's happening with farmers and certain restrictions, and they're running into trouble with the government when the people who are producing sort of the most unnatural processed foods are just running along producing all that stuff, whereas the people who are trying to do things, you know, the most natural way, as it's been done for years, are all of a sudden running into all of these roadblocks. And to the extent that that makes it more difficult for us to get that product is really scary. It's scary and it's sad.
I'm Linda Felice, and I studied mad cow disease over in England. I worked with Professor Eric Lamming, who was the advisor to the EU and the British governments on mad cow disease and how to deal with it and how to make public policy dealing with mad cow disease. My husband Larry, he has a PhD in animal science, and he was doing a postdoc in England while I was working with Professor Lamming, and he came across the British Sheep Dairy newsletter. And we knew that we wanted to work together. We wanted to do something in agriculture and something that would be financially viable with our children. And when he found the British Sheep Dairy newsletter, he said, that's it, we're going to milk sheep. And I said, we're going to milk what? Because at that time I didn't even realize you could milk sheep. And so in 1993 we moved to Vermont. So we worked with the USDA for 3 years, brought over sheep from Belgium and the Netherlands, and set up a family sheep farm. When we brought the sheep over, they had to go through 2 months quarantine over in Europe and a month quarantine here in the United States, so that if there was any transmissible, communicable diseases. So a whole series of tests were run on the sheep while they were over in Europe, and the same tests were repeated here. All the sheep passed with flying colors. First of all, there's no sheep in the world that's ever had mad cow disease. Second of all, we know what these animals ate, because the theory was that BSE, or mad cow disease, was transmitted through contaminated feed from ground up cattle being made into meat and bone meal, and then being put into cattle feed and into sheep feed. And we knew that none of the shepherds had ever used any feed that had any meat and bone meal. Plus, these animals were lambs when they came in, so most of the feed that they had eaten was their mother's milk. And USDA, they kept telling us that they wanted us to surrender the animals. And we were approaching it from a scientific way. And so USDA showed up at our farm and put the animals under a quarantine. And when Wayne Zelenga showed up, state vet for Vermont, showed up at our farm, he handed us the quarantine papers and he said, I don't mean this as a threat, but let me tell you, if you tell anybody about this, you go to the media, you get greedy, you ask for a bunch of money, we're going to put you out of business, and don't think we haven't done it before. When we were threatened, we went quiet for an entire year. We didn't tell anybody. We told my parents and Larry's parents, and that was it. So here we're part of this great organic group of farmers working together, and we're seeing them day to day, and we can't even tell them these sheep are being quarantined under fear of mad cow disease. And it was a really, really tough year. We brought over 3 European scientists, and we had a meeting down in Washington at USDA. So the 3 Europeans all presented their information, and they said, okay, this is what's going on in Europe. There's not a single sheep being killed under suspicion of mad cow disease. The flocks that the animals were imported from, they've all been continued to be surveilled. They're all perfectly healthy. Everything showing that our sheep were not at risk. And so then we opened up for questions, and it was silent. No one said anything. And finally, Linda Detweiler's boss, Alfonso Torres, said, look, I'm really sorry, but we're under political pressure, and you're going to have to surrender your animals. The people that have the money are the packers, the slaughterhouses, and the feedlots. And that's who control the beef industry, and that's also who controls USDA. Because there's a whole revolving door of people that go from the pharmaceutical and the beef industries. They have positions there. They go into USDA. They get legislation passed or whatever their pet project is, and they just go back and forth working between the two.
From a science perspective, from a medical perspective, mad cow disease doesn't infect sheep. Sometimes what happens with these situations is when federal authorities embark on a track, it's mighty difficult to turn it around, because there is, well, we're not going to back off. We don't want to lose face. And much as we all like to think of food safety is based on science, and exclusively science, there's inevitably political overtones, there's social overtones, there's societal pressures on the way food safety is run, operated, and in the way that inevitably regulators are going to interact with with the companies that they regulate. Can't be helped.
Our son was 15 years old at the time. He was a huge James Bond fan, and he comes to us and he says, "Mom, Dad, we're being watched." And we're like, "Francis, you know, this is stressful, but don't be paranoid." He's like, "No, I know we're being watched." I'm like, "How can you tell that you're being watched?" "Well, I see these cars going by, and they slow down and they watch me, and sometimes they're parked." And we're like, "Well, this is a tourist area. It could be anybody." He's like, "No, Mom, the cars are clean." Because in Vermont, nobody has a clean car.
And they wore ties.
And they wore ties.
Yeah. But, you know, then we started increasingly, customers would come in the store and say that they saw these guys parked up at the Vista, and they were just being seen more and more. And, you know, here we were doing sheep farming and running a little country store. And, you know, what were they watching for? What did they think we were going to do?
So when USDA was monitoring us, they spent over $1 million watching us. And we would see these guys climbing in and out of the fences. And as part of the court case a few years ago, we received some of the diaries. And the day was broken down into 15-minute segments. And it said what each of the family members were doing, where were we, you know, who was at the store. Larry Felice and son Francis moved the sheep, missed one.
Anyone in the valley that they saw that had a Save Our Sheep bumper sticker, they wrote down their license plates.
And then they investigated them. They also did 2 criminal investigations of Larry. Linda Detweiler requested this. So the first one was to see if anything about the importation had been illegal, and then and they couldn't find anything. So the second one was a personal criminal investigation to see if he had anything in his background. I married a clean one. We took USDA to court to stop them from seizing our sheep, and 17 days before our appeals court hearing, they showed up at 5:30 in the morning in the middle of a blizzard, and they had 42 armed federal agents and USDA officials, and they cleared out our entire barn. They took the sheep that we brought from Belgium and the Netherlands. They even took the sheep that I had brought over from New Zealand, and they took them out to Iowa, and they killed them for a disease that doesn't exist to this day.
Hurry! They can't wait another 2 weeks! Get them moving, people!
They did basically a lethal injection. They collected tissue samples, put them into this lye solution to make them disintegrate, because they were acting like this was such a danger, even though there was absolutely nothing wrong with the sheep. Linda Detweiler received all the test results, and it showed that every single animal was negative. And nobody knew about this except Linda Detweiler. We were unaware of these results. The media kept asking for test results. On August 3rd, 2001, the very same day that she got the test results, there was a press conference by USDA that said they had no test results, and that it was going to be months, that they had to build a new facility, and that they wouldn't know for months until the results had come in. So they lied to everyone.
Later that summer, USDA said that they wanted to take all of our equipment, take a lot of the pieces off of the barn, and basically take anything that we had that would allow us to continue in business. And so they brought
Heather's milking parlor.
Heather's milking parlor, you know, you name it. And so they brought a giant dumpster here, and we filled that up with a lot of the stuff, the trailer they just took off. And what they told us is they were taking everything down to Massachusetts to be incinerated. And they were also taking the hay that we were producing off the land and saying that that was dangerous as well, and they needed to take that away and have that incinerated. Well,
And that went on for a couple months.
Yeah, and I became really suspicious about that. So one day they came to get a load of the hay, and I decided to follow the truck. And they went to the local landfill that's only a few miles away, and they dumped it right into the landfill with everything else. So I guess they really didn't feel it was dangerous. And we found out later that the USDA had all the test results that proved that there was nothing wrong with the sheep before they ever started bringing those dumpsters around. So they had all the evidence to show there was no danger whatsoever, as we all knew from the beginning, but they had the evidence, and yet they spent all this money and created this facade of doing these things for public safety, and all they were doing is dumping things in the local landfill and wasting more resources.
when we were trying to get compensation, they waited till 18 months after the animals had been taken, and it cost us $5,000 a head to bring the animals in. They gave us a check that was $1,300 per animal. And we said, why the discrepancy? Why didn't you pay us at least what you paid these other people? And they said, well, you chose to fight. USDA likes to instill fear. And so by giving people a gag order or telling them they can't talk about it, that makes it so that they feel that they can control it better.
I knew we would win eventually. I didn't know if we could save the sheep, and we didn't do that. But to be able to show that the whole thing was a complete fraud and premeditated and done on behalf of USDA's agribusiness sponsors and not for human health as they pretended it to be.
And I know that I personally have lost all faith in agriculture within this country.
This is one that Francis wrote. And it says, for me, the farm provides a sense of belonging and pride. The farm has allowed me to become much more responsible and active. Yeah, things are busy on the farm, but it's a good type of busy. It helps to make me more organized and prepared. I can do a lot of things outside the farm, but I've learned to fit it in, and I think so far I've done a good job. The farm helps to keep the family and I going from the money from it. It provides the things we need to live. My parents used to have a job outside of the house before we had a farm, but I like the farm because it allows me to be with my parents. And so each of the children, Francis was 14 at the time, and Jackie was 11, and Jackie was particularly connected with the sheep, so she says about, at first all the sheep, especially Ukafester, were very skittish, but eventually all the sheep got used to having me and my family around. Now they're so close to me. They're like little brothers and sisters.
I do see an ominous trend because recently at a farmer's market, a farmer who was selling washed bagged lettuce was cited and given a ticket. And they said this is a processed food.
They're actually going onto the farm and telling farmers how to grow things. So if there's a leafy greens problem because a huge processing plant is bagging leafy greens and shipping it all over the country, all of a sudden your local farmer who's growing leafy greens for their CSA or growing leafy greens for the farmer's market are going to be subject to growing and harvesting standards created by federal bureaucrats who frankly get all of their information just about from large industrial conventional agriculture.
One of the problems that small farmers have is expense. There isn't a lot of government infrastructure that supports how hard it is to be a small farm. And that's something that perhaps has always been true, but increasingly since the 50s, we've watched it really eat away at a lot of the land that we have. It's being very well curated by small farmers and organic farmers.
As farms like ours resonate with patrons who are yearning in their soul and their bodies are craving for real food, and they eat this food and realize, wow, this is actually food that I can pronounce what's on the label and that I can actually make in my kitchen. That's a pretty amazing thing that now 95% of what Americans eat you can't pronounce and you can't make it in your kitchen.
Real food like butter, like real milk, like eggs, have been made the devil in the world of food, to the point where people are afraid to eat real food. And unfortunately, the result of that is 72% of the country is obese or overweight. We have heart disease, cancer, and diabetes rates at all-time highs. And every year, it's getting worse.
We should be able to eat and drink whatever we choose to and feed that to our family. I believe that just as you can buy raw meat and choose to eat it raw, which many people do, or you have a warning label and you can cook it. I don't understand why we can't buy raw dairy products and either choose to boil them ourselves or choose not to. Although I do understand why, because if that was the case, then the agricultural system would have to start producing real food instead of contributing to the problem.
If you look at the statistics between 1970 and now, the U.S. has lost 88% of its dairy farms.
More than any other single food, raw milk is what draws the consumer to the farm. Once they get there, they might buy meat, poultry, produce, but raw milk is what initially causes them to set food on the farm.
You know, there's a urban legend going around about raw milk is not good for you, it's dangerous. You know, I wouldn't be here if it weren't for raw milk, because all of my ancestors had nothing but raw milk.
Raw milk used to be an American staple, but once the pasteurization process came into being, everybody sort of switched over to that. Now raw milk is seen as something that's new.
You can get sick from any food, but raw milk is inherently safe. There are dozens of components in raw milk that kill pathogens and at the same time strengthen your own immune system. These are in the milk, and a lot of them are in the fats in the milk. That's why we always say drink whole milk. Don't drink skim milk, but drink whole milk. Much, much safer to drink whole milk, raw or pasteurized.
Raw milk does prevent illnesses. In particular, it prevents asthma exacerbations, eczema exacerbations, allergic rhinitis exacerbations, and it does so by stabilizing that mast cell or allergy cell and preventing it from releasing the histamine.
So why is so much of our milk pasteurized? In the mid-1800s, children became sick and died after drinking milk from swill dairies. The rotten milk came from cows crowded into filthy stables built next to beer and whiskey distilleries. The cows were fed spent grain from the distilleries rather than grass, and the blue-colored milk they produced was enriched with flour and chalk to make it appear fresh. It wasn't fresh. It was deadly. The outlawing of swill dairies, the advent of refrigeration, and the certified clean raw milk movement made milk safe again. Around this time, it was also discovered that pasteurization killed bacteria in milk. Pasteurized milk and clean raw milk were produced and sold side by side until the 1930s, when milk production became more industrialized. And state governments supported the move towards pasteurization and passed laws making it harder to get raw milk. Over time, consumers accepted this move to pasteurized milk, and the health benefits of fresh, raw milk were largely forgotten. Even though raw milk's health benefits are widely accepted as scientifically proven, state and federal health officials warn that it is too dangerous to drink.
Our bodies nowadays are more used to a lower bacteria count. There will be lots of problems if you have raw milk. It is essentially better for you because if you just alone look at the enzymes and vitamins and nutrients in it. But the pasteurization is a safeguard. Raw milk is whatever comes out of the cow. If it's very clean, it's a great product. If it's not, people are going to get sick. It's too dangerous to really do that without a pasteurization.
Raw milk, yeah, it's got microbes in it. Most of those microbes that we get exposed to and that live in our gut are harmless. They don't make us sick. And even if they do, there's probably just low levels that if it's just a low level of exposure, it's not necessarily life-threatening or a huge problem. But there are microbes that get into milk that we know can be deadly. Severe gastrointestinal illness, kidney failure, strokes, and death. And the bug I'm talking about is E. coli 0157. It's rare. It's not an everyday occurrence in every gallon of raw milk that you buy. It's like you're playing Russian roulette with the milk at some horribly high odds ratio. But it is a risk.
The state of Maryland does not allow the sale of raw milk directly to the consumer, and that does include the cow sharing programs. And this is in concert and agreement with the Federal Drug Administration, FDA, CDC, which is the Center for Disease Control, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Medical Association, the U.S. Animal Health Association, the World Health Organization. And the reason why the state of Maryland does not allow the sale of raw milk is raw milk can contain a wide variety of pathogens, which are disease-causing agents.
I became a raw milk activist because raw milk was banned in my state. I live in Maryland, and initially, when we first started drinking fresh milk, we participated in a cow share program. Now, a cow share is very similar to a timeshare, where families will go in together on a cow and then get the milk from their own animal. And that was legal in Maryland when we first started drinking, but then the health department changed the regulations to ban that. That really upset me, because here I am trying to feed my children as healthfully as I can, and the health department is completely undermining my authority as a parent, all my research, and saying, you don't know what you're doing, and you can't give this to your family. Now, I can go out and feed them fast food 3 times a day. I've been through 4 pregnancies. I could smoke through all of them, and yet I can't go to a farmer near me and purchase this amazing, healthful, nutrient-dense, fresh milk.
Cows! Come on, cows! Come on, girls! Let's go! Hey, you cows!
I'm Steve, and this is Barb Smith. We live in on about 150 acres on a ridge overlooking Seneca Lake, which is one of the Finger Lakes in central New York. We have about 30 cows, and we milk 9 of them. We have 2 draft horses, about 10 chickens.
2 pigs.
2 pigs.
And 9 kids.
And 9 kids, yeah. We're raising 9 kids. We decided to form a community-supported dairy where we would have a small herd of cows and milk it and then distribute that milk to the members of this group. We did that, and we had 100 members or so, but Ag and Markets did not like that. They came and inspected us with several warrants. They tried to get us for contempt of court. They did several court actions to stop us from milking cows and distributing milk privately to members of our community-supported dairy.
The state of New York started to escalate enforcement actions against the Smiths. First, they would send in inspectors to the Smiths farm and say, you need a permit for what you're doing, and the Smiths would say, no, we don't need a permit. The Department of Ag and Markets would then levy administrative fines against the Smiths. The Department of Ag and Markets would then go in and try to execute a search warrant against the Smiths. Ag and Markets would confiscate some dairy products and order it to be destroyed. So they escalated these enforcement actions against the Smiths over the course of about a year.
Ag and Markets is the Department of Agriculture and Markets in New York State. That's what they call it. It's a different name in each state. And theoretically, I looked a little bit through the history of ag and markets, and theoretically they were established to support farmers so the agricultural products could get to markets and do anything they could to further that. Obviously, that's not what they're doing. The ag and markets kept saying, we have to inspect one more time, we have to. And so finally Gary thought, well, all right, we'll give them one more inspection. They came with the director of milk control, the assistant director, and our inspector, and they all came and pretended they were just going to do an inspection, and then they did a seizure.
Cooler that was seized and labeled. We had a few shelves full of yogurt in here at the time, and I don't think they had any legal way to ban us from making raw milk yogurt other than to go through this inspection and say that it was unfit for human consumption. In their estimation, this place was so filthy that food fit for human consumption could not be made here. So they condemned the lot. They condemned about 5 gallons of milk and they had this fancy red seizure notice. I can still see where it was taped on here. And they taped it across the handlebars so that we couldn't open the cooler without breaking their seal.
So they took all of our yogurt and milk that they they locked into the cooler with these locks saying we couldn't touch it and all that.
The only farm crop that's regulated more than raw milk is marijuana. And it just seems ridiculous.
It was very hard for the family. The kids were terrified. They were scared for a long time of someone else coming, because even though we tried not to act too paranoid, we had to talk about things like, next time they come, what are we going to do?
In most of the states that allow farmers to sell raw dairy direct from the farm, like places like Pennsylvania and New York State, they can only sell milk. And the reason that they can't sell butter and cream and cheeses and so forth is that those are considered to be processed foods. And the more processing that's done in the view of the agriculture authorities, the more chance there is for contamination.
Throughout the making of this film, I tried to contact numerous government officials to give the other side of the story. I decided to travel to Albany, New York, to confront the State Department of Ag and Markets to discuss the Smith case.
You came unannounced.
If I come back,
We can make an appointment, but one of the things is that we have to get through these court cases in order to talk about these issues.
But their case is closed.
It is not closed. They have the opportunity to appeal, which I was just informed of when I just went to our attorneys and said, hey, they're asking about this. I just want to make sure, what can we say? Because we are looking into the question that you asked on the email about why. But the why digs up. I mean, this is a law from 1938. So the law is in place. You asked about why. Why? Okay, good question. Legislative history, why did this law even pass in 1938? Those are the things we're looking into that question for you.
Okay.
But that was also part of the court case, which they can appeal.
All right. What about if we didn't address that issue at all and just address the issue of the yogurt and the cream?
That was part of the court case. That was part of the court case.
So even
though... I can't talk about that today.
Even though it's just general policy, like it's just your policy.
But it relates to the court case.
People from the government don't really want to talk for some reason, which bums me out because I think that if you feel strongly enough to shut down a farm, that you should be able to talk about it.
The Department of Agriculture and Markets here in New York does allow the sale of raw milk. We're one of 28 states, I believe, that allow the sale of raw milk at our farms with certain protections in place in order to protect both consumer and the producer. And so that means strict regulations and requirements on behalf of the producer, limited sales, and those are things that we feel strike a balance in between protecting both producer and consumer. And so we are very open to communication with our producers about the challenges and opportunities of selling raw milk here in New York State. We will continue to do those, to have those conversations once this litigation is closed.
As an attorney and a former government employee, I need to point out, I'm scratching my head trying to figure out, why is this so important to the government? Why are they stamping down on, the little guy? Why don't they go after the foods that are inherently dangerous? So to me, that's the $64,000 question, is what's motivating these governmental officials to crack down on small family farms? Are they being financed by big agribusiness? Are they being financed by the dairy industry? What's causing all this? Do these government officials come from big agribusiness companies and then go into government?
Because we live near Ithaca and Cornell is the big employer down there, a majority of our members are somehow connected with Cornell. A lot of them are in the sciences. These are all very educated people who, they're not people who don't know the difference between raw milk and pasteurized. They're making very deliberate decisions to drink raw milk. So it's kind of funny because I think about taking them all to the judge and saying, would you all stand up and introduce yourselves?
And that case is still on appeal, and we hope that some judge will be able to decide that this is a legal private enterprise.
I think raw milk being illegal is an absolute travesty. It's extremely helpful, and the science behind it is pretty compelling. And I think that what we need more of in this country, and I think what we can all agree upon, is the ability to make choices for ourselves, choices for our family, and everything else. I think that's what makes it so great.
The public health establishment should do a lot more to educate dairy farmers on how to produce raw milk safely, so that consumers that want to obtain raw milk can obtain it, and those who don't want to obtain raw milk don't have to buy it.
Raw milk is regulated on the state level, and that's why we see such a hodgepodge of laws regarding raw milk. In some states like California, you can buy raw milk in stores. In some states, you can buy raw milk directly from a farmer. In some states, it's illegal for anyone to sell raw milk. I do want to state that it's illegal nowhere to buy, possess, or consume raw milk.
The FDA requires that if milk is sold across state lines, it does have to be pasteurized. So if a state does allow the sale of raw milk, that milk has to stay within the state. It cannot be sold over state lines.
There's a terrible regulation out. It's been on the books for over 20 years that prohibits raw milk for human consumption from crossing state lines.
My name is Eric Wagner. I'm the market manager for Athens Locally Grown. And, everybody shows up at one spot in Athens on a Thursday afternoon to meet the produce from the growers to the customers. And this last week on Thursday, when we arrived at the pickup location, there were several inspectors from the Department of Agriculture waiting for us. And they were there. They were from the meat division. I think they might have been looking at the meat products to make sure everything was legal there, which of course it is. And in the process of looking at that, they entered my truck and found a bunch of coolers.
Raw milk from South Carolina, USDA grade
licensed dairy, a imminent health hazard according to the state of Georgia.
I believe that the freedom to choose your own food is very important, and I like knowing where my food comes from. So I would like to have raw milk sales in the state of Georgia and allow dairy producers to make that choice of whether they want to provide that to the consumer.
I understand that the government wants to protect us, and I understand that the people that made the laws felt like that was the only way to go. And if, you know, cows are grain-fed, sure, that might be the only way to go. But we know that grass-fed cows produce really nice milk.
So what we want to do, Denise was there on Thursday to just witness that everything is the way that it was on Thursday.
In the with the gray hair is Peggy. She's the director of the dairy division, and the lady in the blue jean jacket is from the FDA. She's Federal agent, and the tall gal in black is state dairy, meat inspector. So you just want me to haul it out and pour it out?
Yes, please.
So can we get our milk? I mean, it's my milk on that truck.
No, ma'am. It's got to be destroyed. But I paid for it.
I think people can pour out their own gallons if they want to.
As long as it's poured out, you can hold it and pour it out.
Mine was actually technically already paid for.
Eric, does the milk go all the way back?
It goes all the way back, yeah.
It's what I use for my cornbread. It's what I use for making my cheese, cottage cheese, my butter.
I've been working with locally grown for a while now, and I've never heard of a single person getting sick on the raw milk that they've purchased there.
Or anything else.
Or anything else, actually. But if they did, it would be much easier to trace back where that problem was than, say, you know, milk that came from who knows where and has been shipped all over the country. And
the milk from 10,000 cows mixed together in a vat, and then trying to find the problem. Millions of people theoretically could be ill before you
even know
could track it.
Well, they came and made us dump all the milk and left, and they were very, very clear that there's absolutely no wiggle room, that federal law prohibits someone from crossing state lines, buying milk from a dairy, and bringing it back for their own personal use in their own home. So I'm not sure where we go from here. There's a lot of questions still up in the air. Some folks that own the milk that was on this truck are wondering how it was they were able to search and seize without warrants, so that might need to be resolved. And the other issue of how they have jurisdiction at all if somebody were to go and buy it for their own personal use in their own home.
You can't get angry about it. You have to understand what it is, what it is. This is their way of doing business. They'll degrade anybody they possibly can. They'll ruin anybody they possibly can to keep an agenda of where everybody's at in the narrow parallels, and don't you dare get outside the line.
When I go to Pennsylvania for my milk, I'm getting most of my food there. You know, I've got 4 kids. I don't have time to go to a different farm for every item. So the Maryland farmers are missing out on so much more than just milk. The meat, the eggs, the chicken, all those purchases are happening in Pennsylvania as well because of the ban on fresh milk in Maryland.
Mark Knoll is a Mennonite farmer living in Pennsylvania. The government in Pennsylvania, however, doesn't like what Mr. Knoll is doing, and so they have repeatedly come to his farm, executed search warrants at his farm, confiscated some of his production equipment, confiscated some of his raw dairy products, and to this day is continuing to harass him into getting a permit or a license so that he can, under the state's eyes, legally sell raw milk.
He had actually asked the Department of Agriculture, could he sell raw milk direct without a permit? And the man in charge at that time said, you can. There is no law that says you have to have a permit if you're selling privately, directly. Well, someone new came into the Department of Agriculture, and he would never answer this farmer's question, but his reply came in the form of 3 raids on this farm.
Mark Knoll has been raided several times by the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture. I think it's just an attempt to send a message to other farmers. I mean, there are a number of other farmers who were selling raw milk without permits in that state, and it's an attempt to intimidate them into going along with Pennsylvania licensing requirements, which Mark objected to, because under the licensing requirements he can only sell raw milk and raw cheese aged over 60 days. He can't sell other value-added products like butter, cream, and yogurt. And he thought he was an unjust law, and he exercised his conscience.
And in all, I think they took about $65,000 worth of food and equipment. They terrorized the children, took the farmer away in handcuffs.
Both the PDA and the FDA say that Mark refused to answer the citations that they served on him, and so they had no choice in their view except to go and actually arrest him, bring him in, and serve him with the citations, and in that way.
Smile for the camera.
My name is Mark McAfee. I'm the founder of Organic Pastures Dairy, and we have been selling and distributing a wide variety of organic raw dairy products that are grass-fed here in California for the last 9 years or so. From our dairy here on 405 acres of the wonderful fertile ground in San Joaquin Valley, all certified organic with about 400 cows. The interesting thing is it's the entire food chain we manage, all the way from the earthworms in the dirt, the grass, the cows, the milking of the cows, the quality assurance of the milking of the cows, all the way through the cold chain, the creamery, the bottling, the business end of it, the distribution, the relationships with stores, the relationships with consumers, most importantly.
I, who had not consumed milk in probably 30 years because it just gave me stomach cramps, I drink it every day now. It's just amazing. It's just amazing stuff.
Used to be there was only one kind of milk, it was just milk. Nobody really thought about it. As people are learning that there's a difference and are beginning to ask what the difference is, the market has been expanding rapidly.
I've been buying raw milk here at the farmer's market for about 6 months now. My main reason for purchasing it is the ethical treatment of the cows that it comes from. I know they're pastured cows. They're not locked in pens where they're milked daily and fed hormones or antibiotics. And so that's my reason for purchasing it, for the main point.
But I wasn't sure like how exactly.
Well, if you were drinking a pasteurized dairy product, and it's
we know that but pasteurized milk is missing its complementary bacteria and its enzymes, which inhibit pathogen development. So if it gets in to the pasteurized milk afterwards, the listeria gets in, you've got a real problem. And the FDA doesn't seem to think that that's a big thing. Because their response to that was not a big shutdown, not a big fine, not a big any media thing. It was just a whatever and go on. And we see this time and time and time again, that it's okay to kill people, but boy, you even come close to sniffing with raw milk and hang them high.
As the call for fresh milk grows, so does consumer demand for pasture-raised beef, chicken, and lamb. I went to interview Joel Salatin, a Virginia farmer who has written 5 books on the subject and is one of the forerunners of the movement.
I'm Joel Salatin, co-owner of Polyface Farms here in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. Back it up a little bit. Back it up a little bit. Okay. That gives them time to catch up with what you're doing. Okay. So right here is where they were yesterday, and you can see, you know, the manure that they've done. They've grazed it. They've eaten a lot of the grass, but they've dumped their manure, and then the shelter gets moved every morning to another spot then that's fresh. See birdies. That's fresh and new, no manure, fresh grass, fresh clover, what we call a fresh salad bar, and the birds then are able to stay ahead of their, ahead of their manure, ahead of their excrement. They get their diapers cleaned every day, their linens cleaned, and they get this fresh salad bar every single day. So it's a very hygienic, sanitary way. And then, of course, the manure goes into the ground. And if you just pivot around, you can look right down here. You can count back 1, 2. Here's 3 days. Okay, 3, 4. Here's 5. The manure is already, stimulating the grass growth, and you've got new growth. In confinement animal factory operations, CAFOs, these birds, of course, number one, they'd be in a great big confinement house, 15,000 birds, a house that's the size of a football field and a half. And of course, they would have to bring in wood shavings for a little bit of bedding, not much, just very little. And then you've got all this manure that builds up. And of course, the chickens are in their own manure all the time, in their own excrement. They stay there their whole lives. That manure vaporizes, so they're breathing in, fecal particulate dust their whole lives, which makes abrasions in their mucous membranes of their respiratory system. That's why the industry has to give them antibiotics to deal with the abscesses and the lesions that are created in the mucous membranes from breathing in the fecal particulate dust all the time. And of course, then when you're done, eventually you have to go in and you have to clean out all that litter and the manure. So there's a mechanical in with energy, a mechanical out with energy, and of course all the time the birds are in a very unhealthy environment. So, you know, energy doesn't win, the farmer doesn't win, the birds don't win, the eater doesn't win. You know, nobody wins in that system. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to just look at this and say, you know what, this is the way it ought to be. And one of the things I think it's important to understand here is it's beautiful, you know, and good food production should be aesthetically and aromatically, sensually romantic.
Whatever type of meat you eat, you want the grass-based meats, because when you raise animals on grass, you maximize the levels of the fat-soluble activators, vitamins A, D, and K.
One thing that ours have is conjugated linoleic acid. They have 300% more riboflavin. They have polyunsaturated fat. You can see right here where they were. They move them every 2 days. So they were right up there. So then we take that fence up, we set it up down here, and then move them. And then there's another set of turkeys right over the knoll right down there. So there's 2 sets of 400 and some turkeys here in 2 sets. Aren't they beautiful? Now, I may not be the richest guy in the world, but man, what an office. You know, it's a great office. So we move the pigs every few days from paddock to paddock. This, of course, is the paddock they'll be going into. Light footprint. This is pigs the way they're supposed to be. Years ago, every farm around here cured its own pork, its own hams. I mean, Virginia hams, cured pork. That was the thing that this area was known for. And all of us did it, but now you can only sell it if it's cured in a federal inspected facility, which means we have to go from our federal inspected facility to another federal inspected facility to get it cured, and then re-import it to the farm. And what that means is that circuitous route and the processing cost that they charge us, even at $9 a pound, we don't make a penny on bacon because it's all eaten up in this regulated processing. So, you know, people talk about, you know, your food is expensive, or, you know, and try to paint us as an elitist niche market because our food is higher priced. Most of the time, this higher pricing has nothing to do with production. It has to do with these non-scalable, capricious regulations that keep us from being able to be efficient at accessing our neighbor with better food.
If you're large, you have one set of issues. If you're small, you have a separate set of issues. We think each farm should be regulated based on its size and the type of production operation it's actually engaged in. You can't equate a slaughterhouse with Joel Salatin's Polyface Farm in Virginia. The two are completely different.
My name is Mike Seymour. I'm a livestock farmer in upstate New York. I raise grass-fed beef, pork, sheep, and goats. All the animals are slaughtered at a USDA facility. We have to transport the animals an hour from the farm to a USDA facility twice a week, pick up the carcasses and bring back to our facility to process. I think it's a lot of work for what a USDA facility provides. It doesn't protect anybody from any of the diseases that they claim to. I used to work in a USDA facility. We had to go get our inspector upstairs a couple times a day because he spent most of the day in his office. And I worked at other facilities where the inspectors pretty much didn't do anything that they're supposed to do in the course of a day. We would point out things on the carcass they may want to look at.
The U.S. has a big food safety problem. It just doesn't come from your small backyard operations. It comes from these huge slaughterhouses that, you know, pass cows, slaughter a cow every 30 seconds and can't possibly have the standards of human inspection and cleanliness that that you do when you do it on the farm and you have one cow and you slaughter it for an afternoon or something.
There's a desire on the part of the public to have grass-fed meats. We know that they're a lot healthier. and they don't have all the antibiotics and toxins in them, but the big challenge for the farmer is getting these to market. And part of the problem is the lack of USDA inspected facilities where people can go and have their meat butchered and then sell it directly to the public.
Regulations generally serve as a vehicle for preventing small independent producers from providing the kind of food that people actually want to have. And what we have found in the past is that in general, regulations serve the large industrial corporations. They do not serve small farmers, and in effect, they do not serve the public.
Kiss. Kiss.
I'm Jackie Stowers. I run Manna Storehouse. It's a members-only co-op. In our co-op, you can order organic foods, foods that we actually go to farmers and bring back for people. Foods like eggs, we do chickens, meat, milk, different cheeses. This is the room where the members come and they pick up what products they come for. We put it all together for 1 or 2 days for them to all come and pick up in those 1 or 2 days. When you're here on a busy day, this whole room is packed, and some of us are in the back weighing and boxing things up, and then some of us are front talking to people to keep them, keep all of us talking while we're waiting to get orders together. Our co-op has about 100, 120 members.
Yeah, the Stowers case to me just seems about control. I mean, you have this private cooperative, no complaints to the public health department about them. The Stowers contention, the contention of many others operating similar type cooperatives, is that this is a private contractual arrangement. These are not sales to members of the public, and there should not be state regulation.
We had just got done probably with the most busiest time of the year for us. The week before was Thanksgiving. From where I was upstairs, I only heard the dog barking, but there was a knock on our door, and Katie went to answer, and she was handed a warrant and then, moved to the side, and they came in. I came around the corner, I was at the top of the stairs, and what I saw from at the top of the stairs was a man right here around the corner with his arm like this and a gun pointing up at me. All I could see was a black hat and a black jacket, and that's all I could see, and the gun. And I stood there thinking that this was the serial killer, and he's yelling at me, "Come down now, ma'am, come down right now." When I got about halfway down, someone handed me papers, and I looked down and I saw, it was very difficult to read because I had a man with a gun in front of me. All I could focus on is this man with a gun and my children. That was the only thing in my mind. Our son David was in another room in the other side of the house, and he had a cell phone in his hand, and someone, one of the sheriff's deputies, tried to put his hand up, and David kind of went like this, and they shoved him, brought him down the steps and put him up against the wall. This is the room where we were held for 6 hours. We had 10 children in here, 2 adults. Most of the children were sitting on that couch and over here on this couch, and we had deputies here and over here just watching us so that we couldn't leave this room without permission. My husband pulled up and they frisked him, and then they allowed him to come in the back room with us. During this time, our second son, Chad, was in Iraq, and he calls every day at 11:30. Between 11 and 11:30, he would always call, and when the phone rang at 11:30, we had asked the deputies if we could please answer the phone, that was probably him. They wouldn't let us. And it's ironic that he's over there while we're over here, and any way that he would suffer any kind of post-traumatic distress syndrome from being there, we've here incurred the same thing upon us.
The Ohio Department of Agriculture convinced the Court of Common Pleas here in Lorain County to issue a search warrant. The Sheriff's Department and a SWAT team came into the home of the Stowers and basically just held the family at gunpoint for about 6 or 7 hours while ODA and the local county health department conducted a search of the house, the co-op. Computers were seized, records were seized, and even the family's own personal food was seized.
We had to deal for about a month, very intensely for 2 weeks with the children, with tremendous fears. Basically what they took was, I would say, a little bit more than a whole cow that had just been processed for our family. I think around 70-something whole chickens. A whole, I think, 22 lambs, all of those slaughtered.
The whole Stowers dispute was over their failure to have a food establishment permit, which is required by the food code. That's a third-degree misdemeanor. I mean, maybe the penalty might be a $500 fine. They sent out a team, I guess, of at least 11 policemen to a peaceful family that had harmed no one.
You know, it blows my mind that government steps into, like Manna Storehouse, and regulate, you know, frozen meat or even, you know, products in cans when you have firearms out there and you have tobacco and alcohol out there, and you even have foods that people are allergic to, which causes death.
Dear Jacqueline Stowers, I had heard what had happened to you and your family on December 1st. I am so sorry this happened to you, and I still can't figure out why someone would do this to you all. Please know there are folks, even in Idaho here, who are outraged and angry over what you all went through. I'm sending this small amount to help you and your family through this difficult time. This one's actually from Ireland. It says, Dear all, I just read about the raid on your co-op. As a co-op member of the best part of 30 years, interspersed with 8 years of organic shop ownership, I am absolutely appalled as to what has happened to you. Being on the other side of the great pond, I don't really think there's anything I can do to help, but I just wanted to let you know that you have my sympathies, and I hope justice will prevail and that you can continue your important work. Slán Ute.
The Stowers case continues to be litigated. The Ohio court found that their co-op needs a retail food license in order to operate. Their case is now on appeal.
Rawsome Foods originally started in a garage. It's been in business for about 12 years. We are a private membership club that doesn't serve the public. On June 30th, there was a knock at the back gate. I wasn't here at that moment. And it was a SWAT-type team raid, which included the FBI, the FDA, the CDFA, and the health department, along with half a dozen sheriffs.
We were setting up shop in the morning like we usually do around 6, and I believe around 7 we got a knock at the back gate, and there was police back there with a search warrant. They said, we have a search warrant for the place, please stand up against the fence, and they frisked all of us.
I think there was about 4 or 5 staff members, and they were all moved to the back of the property the minute that they came in, and then they drew their guns, went down the property, and of course you can see on our video surveillance system that they were very serious about the guns being drawn. On the search warrant, it basically is alluding to a felony in progress here, and I'd like to know, first of all, what felony, and second of all, in order to authorize a search warrant, you need somebody that's complained or somebody that was irreparably harmed, and those pages of the search warrant are missing. They came in and they were here for over 5.5 hours. And on one of the things that we find interesting is that their search warrant authorizes the taking of vials of samples, of which, of course, would fit in a soft-sided cooler that you would carry under your arm. And they came armed with 17 of their own large coolers and basically took thousands and thousands of dollars worth of product that weren't even named on the search warrant. The search warrant named both Sharon Palmer and Healthy Family Farms and Rossum Foods and James Stewart. That's on the search warrant. And Sharon was raided 20 minutes before we were on the same morning, June the 30th.
We were just recently raided again for the third time, 6:30 in the morning, knock on the door, and my kids again ousted from their beds, and more humiliation. And they came with Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, Los Angeles County District Attorney, Ventura County Sheriffs, CDFA, which is California Department of Food and Agricultural, Environmental Health from Ventura County, Building and Safety from Ventura County, CSI, and all kinds of sheriffs, and wearing their flak bulletproof jackets. And there was probably 40 to 50 people here, just searching the farm, refusing to acknowledge that I was under supervision of California Department of Food and Agriculture and was not selling raw milk. The only milk that has ever left our farm was milk that was provided to a co-op in Santa Monica in California, and that's a co-op called Rossum Foods. And they own 40 goats, and I had made an arrangement with them. It would help paying the bills and whatnot, that if they bought the goats, that we would milk them, and they would come up every week and pick up their milk. And they gave us, they paid us to make their cheese or their yogurt, and they would come up every Tuesday and pick up their cheese and yogurt. We've been processing food and eggs and cheese for now 9 years, and very, very, very happy customers, and no one has ever been sick, or we've never had a problem nor a complaint. And we have a lot of really happy people who depend on the farm for fresh, locally grown and organic food. The feelings that come over you first are disbelief. You grow up in a world where police and sheriff and law enforcement are good. And you watch the news every day and you read these stories and you say, oh, that person has to be an awful person to be raided or arrested. And then you're in those shoes and you sit back and you see yourself and you say, you work 12 to 14 hours a day. You take care of animals, you take care of kids, you raise food, you do everything as best you can, and law enforcement has the right to come in and publicly humiliate you, ruin your business, take away all of your livelihood for a fact-finding mission.
There we go. Good girl.
In order to get a certified organic dairy, all of your animals have to be raised from the second day of life on your property. And everybody here, myself and my kids, have raised every animal here and bottle fed them. And so I was afraid that they would take all the dairy goats. So we found a farm in Northern California, and we just moved all of our dairy goats up there. And so now the dairy's empty, and all we have is some of the pregnant mommies left and our babies. Why all of this happens and why they spend millions and millions of dollars raiding a small farmer in Ventura County for the fear of me maybe at one point selling raw milk.
I say come here for a week or two and have a chat with the mothers and the children and everybody else who's been eating these foods for decades, and see that you've been misinformed about what you think is harmful. It's not only not harmful, it's beneficial.
I made this movie to be a cautionary tale for consumers. Our freedom to choose the healthy food we want to eat is in danger. Our government needs to stop harassing small farmers, small processors, and food buying clubs. We need to encourage farmers to produce safe meats, vegetables, fruits, and dairy products. And the public health establishment should support farmers' efforts to get these nutrient-dense foods to accessible markets.
If I had one thing to say to the USDA and the FDA, I guess my question would be, why do you hate freedom so much? Why? What is it about freedom? Whether it's a consumer's freedom to choose the food that they want to drink, whether it's me as a farmer choosing the customer who wants to buy my product, or how I want to make my product. What is it about freedom that is so horrendous to you that you are willing to take my property, take my life, take my customers, take my animals, take my land, that you're willing to do this in order for me to not have the freedom to even sell a pork chop to my neighbor?
It needs to be our choice what we eat and how to take care of ourselves. We get enough media blitz, we get enough bombardment with advertising, $10 billion a year for our kids to eat junk food. We have to listen to all of that. Why shouldn't our voice be heard? And if we choose to not go with the flow, if we choose to go against the grain, unless it's sprouted, that is, we should be able to. And so it's not as much I want to say that the health organizations, Food and Drug Administration, USDA, need to go fly a kite. What I believe is we need to have the rights we've been given as Americans, and we need to be able to have the right to choose healthy foods.
Food is the underlying way we're supposed to stay healthy. It's not visiting the doctor more often to get more and more drugs, which have terrible side effects many times. It's about eating whole, unprocessed foods. That's what we've done for hundreds of thousands of years, very successfully. And we've somehow had a detour in the last 70, 80 years and lost the fermented foods and lost the whole foods and looked for that long, extended shelf life dead food in our food paradigm, which is horrible for what we are as bacteriosapiens. We need the bacteria, we need the enzymes, we need the wholeness of our foods to be healthy.
Consumers have a fundamental, inalienable right to produce and consume food of their own choice. And a consumer has a fundamental right to enter into a one-on-one contract with a farmer or even an agricultural producer to obtain the food that the consumer wants.
Big companies aren't capitalists. They don't believe in free markets as much as small farmers and small business people do, because they're competitive and they work hard. But the only way we can get this change is the people have to become so outraged that they get the attention of Congress. And when Congress hears about it, if it's in their interest because they like their job, and if they know that it might hurt the voting record, and then they'll pay attention.
There aren't a lot of advocates right now for sustainable farming and organic farmers within our government. And I'm hoping that the public pressure and the support of local foods is starting to push change, because we're really messing up our environment. And small farmers do a lot to support the land that we have and keep it clean.
Intelligent people in this country are coming to second guess our farming and agricultural policies and saying, wait a minute, we may have been able to produce a lot of cheap food by this system, but was that healthy food?
Some terrible things are happening out there. Fortunately, we do have good legal help now, and we have the internet, and we have ways of publicizing these things. But it's America, wake up. I mean, these things are starting to happen, and if we don't have a huge outcry, it will continue to happen.